7 November, go. Now 1 Charlie, 7 November, go.
It's really exciting to be here today. I thought about a number of topics to potentially discuss today, but after the effects of Hurricane Sandy hit the east coast of the United States last week, or a couple of weeks ago, I decided that was probably the most timely and relevant topic to discuss. Now, when I grew up back in the 1500s, I grew up in a very small village, 50 people. But the majority of the world, or at least half of the world's population today, live in urbanized areas. And this is changing towards more and more urbanization as we look forward into the future. It's predicted that over the next 15 to 20 years, roughly 75% of the citizens of the world will live in cities. Now, a lot of times that makes sense. People come together, there's additional business opportunities, there's theoretically better public systems, there's better safety mechanisms. Hurricane Sandy, to me, though, provided a really good example of what's working today, as well as the challenges we have ahead. During the storm, a particularly large storm, roughly 150 to 200 people passed away. A quarter of those people that died in New York City and the surrounding areas. And so let's talk about that. You know, the challenges went far beyond power outages. It went far beyond the loss of internet service. If you take a look at this picture from Manhattan, cars were underwater. People couldn't get out of their homes. So without power, without internet service, without the ability to travel, it was a tragic occurrence. If you look at this photo from Breezy Point, this is a neighborhood where hundreds upon hundreds of firefighters and their families, firefighters that took part in battling the fires during 9/11 in New York City, many of them lost their homes as a result of this storm. The good news, and I think some of the good things that came out of this, were businesses, individual citizens, all sort of went out of their way to try to provide additional mechanisms for people to charge their mobile devices, their iPhones, and on and on. There's actually a lot of great examples of people having power strips coming out of their homes. There's examples of people offering up their Wi-Fi, their wireless access, so people could get information. Now, New York City did a tremendous job, in my opinion, of initially using traditional media to get the word out. So they used television, radio, newspaper. Now, a lot of people without power couldn't see television. They couldn't hear the radio. And obviously, even if you could pick up a newspaper, the timeliness of that information was far too late, oftentimes. So what you saw happening initially during the storms when it first hit was New York City, a lot of the official offices actually went to Twitter. They started publishing out information about the safety of drinking water. They started publishing out information about what roads were flooded. They started publishing out information about closings and all kinds of other information. So there were a lot of official public sources of information that if you kept your mobile phone charged and could use it, you could get a lot of information. What excites me a lot, though, about the hurricane, and one of the things that I think worked very well, was the engagement of citizens actually experiencing the storm. This is about one of dozens of examples of maps created around the tweets that were taking place during the storm. And you had citizens sharing information about power outages, about shelters where people could find safety, warmth, clothing, both to their fellow citizens but also to the government sources as well. Now, obviously, the volume of information alone presents certain challenges. But here we really see an example of both government reaching out to the citizens, but also citizens doing information and gathering information and sharing it themselves. And then you see a site like Google that took open data sources from places like FEMA and other government organizations that took it a step further even, provided yet another channel for people to reach out and find more information on power outages, as well as official government information. The challenge with a storm like Sandy, the challenge of any type of disaster or serious event, is there's so much information out there. So dealing with the volume of information, dealing with understanding how the audience can actually consume information during these types of events is another challenge to be overcome, and I'll talk a little bit about that. New York City processes about 30,000 911 calls a day. 911 calls, I assume people understand it, but basically it's a telephone system. If you have an emergency, whether it's a fire, a robbery, or whatever have you, that you can call in. They process typically about 30,000 of these calls a day. 40% of these calls on an average daily basis are noise to begin with. People walking around with their cell phones in their back pocket, butt dialing, as they call it, wasted calls. During Sandy, though, they received roughly 10 times the normal volume of calls. So roughly 240, 250,000 calls a day. A system that couldn't keep up with 30,000 calls a day was overwhelmed. So people were getting busy signals. They couldn't reach the police, the fire people. They couldn't get help. It led to a lot of creative solutions, and in one such example, the Fire Department of New York has one person responsible for tweeting. That person, she actually took it upon herself to look for distress calls and other types of requests for help coming across Twitter, and acted as a dispatcher trying to complement 911 and get information to the right sources. Again, one person, one official source, trying to use Twitter as another source of 911, another way to get help out there. Oops, let's see. Remembering the audience is key. As I mentioned, people were without power, they were without internet service, but they were doing their best to keep their mobile devices charged. The Red Cross has a tremendous application. They released more updates during the storm to put more important information right in front of the audience to get it out there. The GSA, which is one of the biggest government agencies in the US, produced a series of widgets, little embeddable components that people could put on their web pages. And what that allowed them to do was to quickly broaden the reach of the information, of what I call highly verified information, out to their audience. And you also saw SMS, an often underused technology, used to be able to allow people to quickly donate to victims. So there was a SMS number that people could call simply to donate $10 to victims to the cleanup efforts. Managing the information. With that volume of traffic across Twitter and across other sources, there was a great deal of hoaxes taking place as well, providing bad information. So you take a look at this one, it looks like a valid photo, looks like it comes from a credible news source. I can guarantee you the Statue of Liberty was not receiving this level of flooding taking place. It was a hoax. If you look here, you can see a shark swimming around the neighborhoods of New York City. Obviously a fake, but in any storm, it seems like people take great pleasure in putting these kinds of things out there. And unfortunately, it did confuse some people. Another type of information, there was a lot of reports about the New York Stock Exchange being flooded by 3 feet of water. This was a rumor that really caught fire on Twitter, and a lot of people retweeted it. It looked like it was some sort of official information. It wasn't. But really trying to filter information, the good, the bad, is one of the biggest challenges I think governments and citizens have during a disaster and have in general. When you look at businesses, a lot of time businesses are looking at information in aggregate. They're looking at the summary information to make decisions. For government and citizens, especially in times of emergency, the aggregate information is important, but oftentimes it's far more important to get to the real detailed information. You want to know that somebody in some house is having an issue. You don't care about how many overall. You need to reach that individual and help them out. So trying to provide tools that can help filter the information to gather what's valid versus what's invalid is a real critical problem that we have to overcome. Also, I think it's important that governments remain open to looking for sources of help everywhere. Many of you are probably familiar with the Occupy Wall Street movement, whether you were for it, against it, or believe in its cause or not. One of the things that's happened and continues to happen is the Occupy Wall Street movement built Occupy Sandy. And what ended up happening within hours after the storm hit was this group of citizen volunteers got together. They started providing hot meals, clothing, setting up shelters, and really just a great example of citizens coming together to supplement what government's providing to continue to provide more and more information. And I don't know if do I have a couple minutes left? I have 2 minutes. I don't know if this will work. Let's see. I was hoping to show this video, but it's not. Nah, that's okay. There's a great video up on Vimeo that if you have a chance, it's about Occupy Sandy. Take a look at it. It's members of the Occupy movement as well as citizens that have benefited from the cause, talking about the types of challenges they've had to deal with. New York City, you deal with a lot of high-rises, so there's a lot of challenges, people without power, without elevators, trying to get down to the street to get food in order to carry that back up to their sick relatives or to people that are wheelchair bound. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that video, and that's it. Thank you.